I'm here with Oriana Zilder-Granados, producer and writer of Frontline's The Card Game, an award-winning investigative journalist and documentary filmmaker. The Card Game is being shown Tuesday night at 9 o'clock on PBS. You can also watch it at the frontline.org website. And I'm also joined by Gail Hillebrand. She's senior attorney of Consumer Union, nonprofit publisher of Consumer Reports magazine, and she also directs the defendyourdollars.org website. So the credit card industry is completely out of control. I was shocked to read that there's 100,000 credit card transactions every minute in the U.S., and the profits just off late fees are how much, Gail? Almost $20 billion?
Just over $20 billion a year for this year.
That is outstanding.
Outrageous.
Outrageous. Thank you. That is outrageous. How credit card companies right now are increasing fees by 20 to 30% because new rules that Congress passed don't go into effect until February. So all of this stuff that's happening is legal.
Yes. Watch your mailbox, because they do have to give you notice now if your rate's going up on the money you already borrowed. And you do have the right to say, nope, I want you to cancel my card instead. I'll pay off at the old rate. But if you miss that notice, the sky's the limit on how high your rates can go between now and February 22 on the money you already borrowed.
So it's really important if you get any kind of statement or anything that looks like junk mail to open it.
Open it, read it, try to make sense out of it. And if you're having trouble making your higher new minimum payment or your existing payment because of a financial problem, talk to the nonprofit consumer credit counselor in your area as soon as possible. Don't wait till you start missing payments. And don't go with those folks who advertise on daytime TV about how they're going to help you stay out of bankruptcy.
Oriana, what struck me about the Frontline documentary is you were able to interview people who rarely talk to the media, insiders, credit card executives. What really struck you about being involved in this documentary?
Well, I guess for me it was really surprising to understand that as part of the sort of for-profit nature of the credit card industry, there has been just a kind of ignoring of the fact that these kind of practices really do damage people's lives. And I think that there's a real disconnect between the way the companies are being run and the way people view them. And that, with the falling down of the economy in the past year, has come to a head. And that's one of the reasons we're finally seeing reform. But the fact that the disconnect is so great between what you talk to people out on the streets and what they tell you and what the companies view their own practices as being was absolutely shocking to me. And I think that there needs to be a lot of work done on both sides of the coin. First, so consumers understand the products better and the dangers of the products, and second, so that the companies understand how they're really harming people with these products and that it's not going to be good for anybody. That's the sort of shocking thing about it, is the companies aren't going to do well in an environment where they're driving people into default and bankruptcy and horrible life choices. So I think there just needs to be, and there hopefully will be in the coming year, a bunch of changes. I do think it's important that the regulatory steps that need to be taken are taken, because I think it just went too far. As we saw in the mortgage meltdown, it's the same problem. There was no regulation out there that was controlling any of these practices.
First, this is the first time Congress has reformed the industry in 10 years. I asked the question on the show, why did it take so long? But you say the better question is, why are they reforming the industry? What pushed them to do it?
Well, what pushed them to do it is these practices became so widespread, they started touching a lot of middle-class people who had kept up their end of the bargain, had paid their bills on time, and folks stood up and said, something's wrong with the system. We need to make sure it doesn't take 10 years to stamp out the next round of bad practices, and the way to do that is to tell Congress you want the Consumer Financial Protection Agency to be an agency, just like we have an agency for safe cars, we'd have an agency for safe financial products. Write some ground rules so that the way you get ahead in the banking industry is not to cheat your customers.
And you also point out that these predatory practices don't just affect the poor. They've been affecting the poor for a long, long time, but nobody's been listening to them. Now that they're affecting the middle and upper class, and they're complaining about it, Congress is finally listening.
Yes, in both credit card fees, some of your checking account fees, overdraft fees. We saw these practices pioneered against lower balance customers, customers closer to the margin. And then when they got away with that and saw how profitable it was, they started imposing on everyone. That's an excellent reason for all of us to pay attention to what banks are doing to our neighbors as well as to ourselves.
And Oriana, because we are completely disconnected from D.C., you were able to interview people like Senator Chris Dodd, people on the Banking Finance Committee. What insights can you give us about just what they're thinking? I mean, they're receiving millions and millions of dollars from these very companies. And, I mean, it's pretty obvious why there hasn't been reform, because they're in the pockets of these politicians. But can you give us any insight about, I mean, do they know what's going on, right?
Well, I think, to be fair to them, they would argue strongly about the statement you just made. They would argue that they're not in the pockets of the banks, and that the money that the banks give helps them, yes, run their campaigns, but that they don't, vote with the banks every time just because of that money.
Just 90% of the time.
Well, I mean, you have to look at people's records. And I think, like with Senator Dodd, for example, his record has been very positive on this issue. He has consistently pushed for reform, even in the face of huge opposition over the last 10 years. So he has pushed for reform. Same thing with Congresswoman Maloney. And others. There are certainly others who have pushed for reform and have been trying to bring this issue to the forefront of debate. They have been unsuccessful until now, and that's partially because the Democrats are in control of the White House and Congress. But it's also partially because of the economy and the anger and the really fury out there. When you talk to people, I mean, it's just shocking how furious everyone is. And it's a bipartisan, anger. And this is not a Republican Democratic issue. Everybody has credit cards. Everybody is a consumer in this country. In terms of campaign finance, what Dodd said to us, he said, look, if I've been in favor of campaign finance reform every time it's come up. And if we pass public financing of elections, I won't take the bank's money. That was his argument. So just to give him his fair, say in that, we were surprised to learn that every single member of the Senate Banking Committee, except one, had taken large donations from the banks and financial services industry. But, I mean, that may not be that surprising to some people out there because, in general, that's the way Congress is funded.
Who's the exception?
The exception is a senator from Wisconsin named Cole who self-finances his elections. He's a very wealthy man, and he self-finances his elections.
And it also seems, Gail, that things have gotten so bad that they just couldn't continue business as usual.
Well, the bankers were very willing to continue business as usual, and consumers were standing up and saying two things. I was paid on time. Why is this happening to me? And my tax money is bailing out these banks, but it's business as usual for them. It's not business as usual for the rest of us. We're facing a bad economy created in part by banking practices, and we're all trying to address that. And people are saying, when are the banks going to step up and start playing by the rules of fairness and common sense? And that's part of what will be established by the Consumer Financial Protection Agency, is to write those rules for fairness and common sense.